And good afternoon. Welcome back to Bloomberg Opinion Editorial Board Conversations. I'm your host, Robert George, and it's my honor once again to welcome back my colleague and my boss, so I'm going to have to be nice to him and good to him for the next few minutes, Clive Crook. Clive, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks.
Great.
Nice to be with you again.
As always. So over the last week or so, these child tax credits were being sent out by the auspices of the Biden administration. It's six monthly payments. Why are they good? What is the best case that can be made for them? And then we can kind of talk about some concerns that we might have about them.
Okay. Well, this is one element of as you know, one element of a wide array of schemes that the Biden administration has either put in place or is proposing as part of its agenda. To restore the economy, address income inequality, and a whole range of other issues. Now, this first CTC, Child Tax Credit Initiative that you mentioned, was part of the American Recovery Plan, and that's now law. And this is a tax credit that goes out actually to most American households, but it's designed in such a way that it delivers a particularly large benefit to people on low incomes. Under the old scheme, you didn't get the full, as it were, tax refund if you weren't working, if you had a low income and you weren't making enough money to set this credit against. Now, in effect, you get a check for the full amount, which is up to $300 a month for children under 6. You get a check for that regardless of what your income is. So the point is that this is a very sort of strong anti-poverty measure. Now, it's just in place for this year, 6 monthly payments, and then there'll be another chunk of cash when tax returns are processed next April. But it's just for this it's a one-year scheme. And so the question is, is it going to be extended? The administration wants to extend it, and it's in their budget planning. And is it going to be actually made permanent? So I do think there's a lot to be said for it. I think it is an effective anti-poverty measure. The big problem is just that it's expensive, very expensive, and it's unclear as yet whether it's going to be properly accounted for and paid for. So that's my concern. I mean, I do think there's a lot to be said for this scheme, but can we afford it? It's an awful lot of money.
Well, exactly. Now, supporters liken the approach on this plan to the earned income tax credit, which goes down to poorer individuals, and that's had bipartisan support over the decades, which is why they think that this is going to that this should also do the same. Now, you made the point that the so-called social welfare infrastructure plan, which they're calling the American Families Act, would extend and make this permanent. What kind of dollar figures are we talking about, and are there actual plans to pay for this?
Well, I mean, very roughly speaking, this thing costs about $100 billion a year in the first instance. If you were to make it permanent, it would depend on the baseline. There are many technicalities here, but round numbers, you're talking about $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion over 10 years. That's the 10-year cost of this thing fully installed. Now, that is a major item, even by modern standards. We've stopped worrying about saying trillions. Now, if something is merely in the billions, it's hardly worth mentioning. But even by modern standards, this is a major fiscal outlay. And it's still unclear about how this will be paid for in the long term. And one of the things that confuses the financing picture is, I mean, you're an expert on Congress, so I don't need to school you in this. You should be schooling me. But I mean, one of the things that's driving me mad, trying to keep my, trying to stay on top of the numbers, is that, you know, these commitments are made for differing spans of time, and the tax changes that are being proposed cover different spans of time. So you've got like taxes covering X years to pay for spending which you want to make permanent. And so it's very, very difficult to get a sense of what this is actually going to cost and how it's going to be paid for. And I think that's not accidental. I mean, I think the political process is very reluctant to actually grapple with these issues and say, this policy is basically a good policy, but it needs to be paid for, and this is what it's going to take to pay for it. There is a great reluctance to grapple with that question. And I think that this could easily become a big, big fiscal problem going forward. If we stay in this mode of not really having the discussion about what we can afford and how we're going to pay for it.
So we said that this is basically for the last 6 months of this year. How are we even going to know if it's working? I mean, we're already talking about making it permanent. How do we make assessments for efficiencies and
Well, there are many dimensions to this. I mean, I should just say it is a whole year scheme. It kicked in just this month, right? So there are now, as it were, 6 monthly payments. But the credit that will be due, the credit that will be paid, is for the whole year. Okay. And so these 6 monthly payments are only half of what people are going to get. The other half would be delivered next April when the tax returns are processed, in the way that people get a tax refund now, or most people expect to get a refund in April. So it's a whole year scheme. That's, as it were, the span of this deal. The monthly payments are a 6-month experiment, because this is another new feature of this scheme, to pay it out in real time, month by month. Now, again, for people on very low incomes, that's a very attractive feature, because, you know, a lot of people struggle, you know, to wait for a relief that's paid once a year, you know, we're in the spring of the following year. And this scheme is trying to pay it in real time. So it's a lot more like a traditional, you know, income support scheme rather than a tax credit, even though that's how it's formally dressed up. Now, to answer your other question about testing it, yes, there are many questions here. I mean, one of the virtues of this scheme, and I'm very sympathetic to this idea, I think it's likely to prove good in this respect, is that because the grant isn't clawed back, this credit isn't clawed back until income reaches quite a high level. So what that means is you aren't.
It's non-refundable. So it's non-refundable, I guess.
No, it's refundable. That covers people at the bottom. So but then the credit is not reduced as income rises until you get to quite high levels of income. Actually, you've got to be making a 6-figure income in order to begin to see this credit reduced. So what that means is, for most people, there's no disincentive to get promoted or to move from not working to working, or to work longer hours. You know, a credit that is clawed back at lower levels of income introduces a high marginal tax rate. This scheme, I think, is very smart to avoid that. It makes it more expensive, but that is a good feature. One of the things I think economists will be looking at after this 6 months is, well, can you see the difference in the numbers? I mean, are people who are receiving this credit still working like they did before? That's something you'd want to see. If there was a big effect on employment, you might begin to wonder whether that feature I've just described as an advantage is actually as powerful as I'm saying it is. So there are many aspects of this to measure. The effect on jobs, the effect on effort, that's one of them. And economists, I'm sure, are going to be looking at that.
I know the way you describe that, I know there have been a number of cases involving welfare payments, whether on the federal side or at the state side, where they have had these situations where, to coin a phrase, where the left hand doesn't know what the far right hand is doing, and you have somebody who is a benefit of, say, a cash payment over here, and ends up making them ineligible for, say, housing or something on the other side. So this seems to be something that it tries to take into account those kind of conflicting issues.
Yeah, in that regard, it's simpler, and it doesn't create these unintended disincentive effect. So I think that is a very attractive feature of the plan. You know, it reaches poor people who are previously left out of these kinds of schemes, and it does it in a way that doesn't discourage work. So I think those are two big pluses.
And I have to point this out. So, you know, some of our some of the listeners out there might notice your British accent, and you have and I'm only bringing. I wouldn't put you on the spot like this only because you use a wonderful Britishism called scheme on this, which to American, I mean, when Americans hear scheme, it has more of it has more of a nefarious sensibility about it than it does to British ears. But I bring it up because obviously there are many people who are particularly on the right who, when they actually do think it's kind of a scheme because it's overly generous on obviously giving to people on the poorer end of the economic spectrum, but it goes up so high that it does bring in many people in the middle class, and some of those on the right, we wonder if that's that's the, as they say, that's a feature, that's not a bug, and it's to try and expand the idea of social welfare to as many people as possible, to encourage support for government outlays. Is that a concern that public policy?
I find it very difficult to make sense of that objection, to be honest, because I mean, for people, let's say in a range of, I don't know, say $60,000 a year to $100,000 a year, they're getting this full credit, but to them it's a tax cut, and conservatives are supposed to be in favor of tax cuts. They aren't going to see it as a welfare payment. It's they get a tax refund. So are we in favor of tax cuts or not? The beauty of this scheme is that it delivers a tax cut to the middle class, but at the same time it includes those on very low incomes as among the beneficiaries. So I think that's a big plus, and I don't understand that line of criticism. I do understand the line of criticism that says this is expensive and we need to work out how to pay for it. That's a fair objection. But this idea that it's like putting most of the country on welfare is preposterous. For most of the recipients, this is just a tax cut.
Excellent. Looking though at the broader tax code, which is, on its best day, we could call it, complicated. Is this adding another complication? Keeping in mind that there are also proposals, obviously, to expand what we were referring to before, the earned income tax credit as well. Are we getting overly complicated now?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, the American tax code is just unbelievably complicated. And you're right to notice that I'm British. Although I should just say, when I go back home now, not that I've been doing much traveling lately, but when I do go back, I'm teased for my American accent. So, get your head around that.
There you go.
No, but I mean, I'm used to a British tax system, which is so simple that most people, the vast majority of Brits, actually never file a tax return.
Is that right?
Withholding at the level of your salary and from saving accounts, interest payments and so forth, withholding takes care of it all. And the great majority of Brits never file a tax return. They don't need to. Well, the problem with the American system is that everyone needs to file a tax return if they've got some income. And now people with no income at all are going to have to be getting in touch with the IRS in order to claim this tax credit. In many ways, I think it will be better to have the income support element of this dealt with by another agency altogether. I do think there's a problem with loading all of this onto the IRS, especially since the way this credit works, the hope is to, the plan is to pay it in real time, month by month. But of course, your circumstances change during the course of the year. Your eligibility for the payment will change. You'll have a child during the course of the year, or a child will exceed the age threshold during the course of the year. Your marriage might break up. You might get married. All these changes in status affect your entitlement to this credit. And the IRS is stuck with having to process this in real time. So I think it's a vast increase in the challenges that we ask the IRS to undertake. And I would love to see any administration really resolve to simplify the tax code. Partly because I think many of the opportunities for avoidance are created by this limitless complexity. A simpler code is harder to gain. And I think the US has given far, far too little attention to simplifying the tax code. And I have to admit, although I'm in favor of this CTC reform on balance, it does make the code more complicated, even more complicated than it already is.
As we finish up here, in making it more complicated, is it also forcing there are many people on the lower end of the economic scale who haven't really even had to file tax returns in the past. Is this, in a sense, going to be forcing them to get involved in more paperwork as well?
Well, I mean, they do. I mean, if you've no income, but you're in a household with a child, then you're entitled to this tax credit. Now, previously, you didn't need to have any dealings with the IRS at all. Now you have to go onto the IRS website. There's a portal for people who want to claim the credit and don't have any income. So I don't know if that's paperwork as such, but you're having to interact with the agency, and you're going to be on their books, and you have to get in touch with the bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy will be getting in touch with you. So yes, there is an increase in that kind of what one might say a sort of interaction between the IRS and the poor, innocent, low-income American. Yeah.
So I guess we'll go back to that old saying, there is no such thing as a free lunch, because you're going to be paying up in time, if time is not money.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's right. I'm afraid that's right. And maybe next April, if it turns out that you've received too much of a benefit, the IRS is going to want some of it back. Yes. So that could be an interesting month for some people too.
And there you go. Clive, thank you very much, and all of you. Thank you, and we'll see you back here for more conversations with Bloomberg Opinion next week. Thank you.